Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really important snapshot of global news. We've got a stack of sources covering the top stories from like the last 10 hours or so as of July 7th, 2025. Our mission really is to pull out the key insights, the nuggets of knowledge from all these different headlines. We want to help you get properly informed on what's happening globally, and hopefully we'll uncover some surprising facts, maybe connect some dots you didn't see before.
Exactly. And that connection piece is, I think, really crucial today. You look at these stories separately, disasters, politics, science, and they seem, all over the place. But when you look closer, you start to see these underlying themes, change, big challenges, and just how linked everything is now.
Okay, let's start then. Let's unpack some devastating news, hitting close to home first. We're talking about Central Texas, the Hill Country specifically. They've been hammered by just record-breaking rain and terrible flash floods. It's just horrific. Reports say at least 78 people dead, and that includes 28 children. Many of them were at a summer camp, Camp Mystic. Search and rescue is still going hard, looking for 41 missing people right now. President Trump has declared it a federal disaster area, and you've got the National Guard out there, drones, Coast Guard helos, the works.
Yeah. And one thing the sources are highlighting, which is important, is what happens after the immediate event. There are already some pretty harsh questions being asked about earlier cuts to weather warnings. It's like a pattern you see after disasters, right? This intense scrutiny starts looking at preparedness, accountability. It forces these tough conversations.
Right, that vulnerability, whether it's a community hit by floods or, global markets suddenly getting spooked, it really shows how fast things can ripple out. And speaking of shocks, there's big turbulence happening in the financial world, too.
Yeah, so while Texas is dealing with this tragedy, President Trump made some moves that really rattled global markets. This happened just as the BRICS leaders were meeting down in Rio. He's threatened new tariffs targeting those BRICS countries starting Monday. We're talking potentially 10% duties on nations he called, quote, anti-American. And the reaction was pretty swift. The dollar got stronger, but stock futures dropped. It just adds more, confusion around this July 9th truce deadline that's coming up.
And this isn't just like market noise. It's a really clear example of trade policy being used as a geopolitical tool. Tariffs fundamentally make imported goods more expensive. That can mean inflation at home, less trade overall, and the dollar strengthening. Well, in uncertain times, people often rush to the dollar as a safe haven. So money moves out of things perceived as riskier, like global stocks. It signals potential shifts in supply chains long term. Kind of reminds you of those trade disputes we saw a few years back, doesn't it?
That's a great point about the long-term ripples. Okay, let's swing back to Texas for a moment, but look at a different angle. The human response, the support pouring in. Matthew McConaughey, Texas's own, he's put out a really strong appeal for Americans to support the communities in Kerr County. He's also praising their resilience, which is amazing to see. And he's not the only one. You've got other celebrities stepping up, Jennifer Garner, Shakira pledging money. And on the ground, the reports mention volunteers doing just grueling rescue work. And you hear these incredibly emotional stories from survivors. It's powerful. It shows that human spirit, I guess.
Absolutely. That contrast is stark, isn't it? The policy decisions, the market shocks, and then this very human, very immediate response to tragedy.
Yeah. Okay, so from that, let's shift gears again. Let's look at international gathering security, what's happening on that front. Over at The Hague, NATO leaders just wrapped up a summit with a pretty major commitment. They're planning to raise military spending significantly, up to 5% of GDP by 2035. And they're also expanding arms shipments to Ukraine, specifically mentioning nuclear-capable jets.
Right. And that 5% figure by 2035, that's not just tinkering with budgets. I mean, that signals a scale of remilitarization in Europe we haven't really seen in, generations, maybe since the Cold War. It suggests they see the current tensions not just as a passing crisis, but maybe as a long-term shift. They're preparing for a sustained period of instability, really reshaping their whole defense posture.
A long-term shift.
Wow.
Okay, so how does that NATO move connect with what the BRICS nations are doing? Because they were meeting at the same time, right? It feels like these two big blocks are, solidifying. Yeah, we mentioned the BRICS summit in Brazil. They've now got a formal plan to bring in Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE, and they've invited Saudi Arabia too. That's a pretty big expansion.
It really is. And what's so interesting is seeing these things happen side by side. the NATO defense boost and this BRICS expansion, bringing in these new members definitely increases BRICS's economic weight, their political influence. It seems designed at least partly to create more of a balance against, Western-led institutions, especially when you factor in those tariff tensions we just talked about. So you've got NATO strengthening internally, defensively, and BRICS expanding outwards economically and politically. It really feels like two major global power centers making moves simultaneously. It's shaping the future of alliances, trade, everything, really.
Fascinating to see them happening in parallel like that. Okay, let's pivot from global politics to something more cultural, spiritual, but with its own geopolitical angle. The Dalai Lama just celebrated his 90th birthday. That was July 6th in Dharamshala. Quite a milestone.
An incredible milestone, yes. And amidst the celebrations, the sources note that, global attention is also on China. As the Dalai Lama ages, there's growing speculation about what happens next, the future leadership of Tibetan Buddhism. And that immediately brings up questions about succession and how geopolitics, specifically China's stance, might intersect with or try to influence what is, at its heart, a spiritual leadership role. So the world is watching that transition very closely for both its spiritual and potential political meanings.
Right, another layer of complexity.
Right.
Okay, now for something completely different and honestly kind of mind-bending, this one literally changes how we think about time. Scientists have found that the Earth's rotation has actually sped up slightly. It means that days in July and August are becoming shorter, but by tiny amounts up to 1.5 milliseconds.
Which sounds tiny, right? A millisecond and a half. But it's significant enough that it sparked this whole debate about needing to introduce a negative leap second. For the first time ever. Imagine subtracting a second from the official clock just to keep synchronized with the planet.
Subtracting a second. Wow. Do they know why it's speeding up?
Well, they're still debating the exact causes. Leading ideas involve things deep inside the Earth, like changes in the molten core or maybe phenomena on the surface. Things like post-glacial rebound, that's the land slowly rising after the massive ice sheets melted thousands of years ago. It subtly shifts the planet's mass distribution, affecting the spin. It's just a wild reminder of how dynamic the Earth is, isn't it? And how we're tied to its physics.
Definitely wild. Okay, from the Earth's spin, let's go to the oceans. Another major change happening there with huge implications. Yeah, this is pretty grim news about coral reefs. There's an ongoing marine heat wave, and scientists are calling it the worst coral bleaching event in recorded history. The estimate is that it's damaged something like 84% of the world's coral ecosystems. 84%.
That number is just staggering, and it massively fuels concerns about climate change, obviously, but also about biodiversity loss. People call reefs the rainforests of the sea for a reason, right? They support maybe a quarter of all marine life. So when you lose or severely damage over 4/5 of them, it's not just about losing pretty colors. It's a potential collapse of marine food webs. It impacts fishing, coastal protection. The knock-on effects are just immense. The so what is huge and urgent.
It really puts the climate crisis into sharp focus. But, okay, let's find a glimmer of positive environmental news. Because sometimes there are comeback stories. This one's out of Paris. They've actually reopened parts of the Seine River for public swimming, which is amazing because apparently swimming there has been banned since 1923. That's a century.
Yeah, 100 years. And it's more than just, letting people take a dip. It represents decades of hard work cleaning up the river, a huge urban renewal effort. And the timing's key too, isn't it? It's partly aimed at boosting tourism and showing off the city's revival efforts right before the Olympics. It's a great example, really, of how environmental cleanup can have these really tangible benefits for city life. Shows it can be done, even big projects, with enough effort and political will.
That's genuinely good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, one last story to round things off. Another climate-related one, but this time with a political dimension happening alongside it. The UK just had its hottest day of 2025 so far. Temperatures hit nearly 36 Celsius, that's about 97 Fahrenheit, down in Kent. Another marker of these extreme weather patterns.
Right. And the sources note that, sort of concurrently, the UK Parliament was moving forward with some pretty controversial welfare reforms, which obviously stirred up political tensions. And putting those two things side by side, it's not that the heat wave caused the debate on welfare, of course not. But it highlights how life goes on, doesn't it? People are dealing with the direct impact of extreme heat, while simultaneously their government is pushing through major policy changes that also affect daily lives. It shows the different pressures and priorities governments juggle.
Yeah, that's a really interesting juxtaposition. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Disasters, geopolitics, markets, science, environment. What's the takeaway when you try to put it all together?
I think For me, it really underscores that interconnectedness we talked about at the start and just the sheer speed of everything. None of these things happen in a vacuum, you know? The tariffs affect markets, which links to geopolitical blocs like BRICS and NATO making moves, which happens against a backdrop of environmental crises like the coral bleaching and heat waves. Staying informed today really means looking beyond the single headline, trying to see those connections, those broader forces shaping events. It's about understanding the ripple effects.
That really sums it up well. And leaves us with a big question, maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. Given this constant churn we've seen just in today's news markets reacting instantly, the planet literally speeding up, climate changing dramatically, alliances shifting, how do we actually prepare? As individuals, as societies, how do we get ready for a future that just feels like it's accelerating on so many different levels? Something to definitely keep thinking about.